The 1 hour and 10 minutes are left behind before the conclusion, and therefore, as we have 4 reporters and Stephen and Professor Seita Emory of the University of Tokyo, who is also part of the project, is with us. Now, based upon the reports, let's begin our discussion. And I'm sure that the panelists want to talk a lot, and therefore, and also those in the audience are also willing to join discussion. So I'd like to give sufficient time for the exchange with you as well. And we had a preparation session on mail beforehand with the panelists. And when the part 3 was over, as of now, what has been already achieved and what are the remaining questions in terms of the Climate Citizens Assemblies in Japan, that's what we wanted to share with you as an understanding. And I sent you an email beforehand, and I believe such understanding has been already achieved given the presentations that we have just received. So we'd like to go beyond that to have even more in-depth discussion. As we have 6 speakers here, or 6 panelists, as I stated at the outset, in Durham County in the UK, the team leader of climate change, who has been engaged in the climate change-related initiatives in practice, is Maggie Bosanket, and I think we are connected with Maggie online.
Yes.
Oh, you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you.
There's a problem.
When I said in Japanese, I think she is listening through translation. And Maggie, you are currently hearing discussion here through simultaneous translation. And in part 3, toward the end of this session, I'd like to turn to you and ask for your comments toward the end of this panel discussion. So now, without further ado, we'd like to begin panel discussion. We received reports by 13 groups. Many points were made, including accomplishments. That was quite encouraging to me as well, personally. On the other hand, some challenges were revealed which were not shed so much light beforehand. In fact, some unexpected issues were also identified as well. So first, Saito-san, Endo-san, Kato-san, and Tokuda-san, who shared with us their experiences in their locality. I'd like to ask for their comments. So first, after hearing 13 presentations, if you have any comments to make or response, or any correction you'd like to make or suggest, what is the reaction to the reports from 13 groups? That's the first question that I'd like to ask of those speakers or panelists. And after joining the group work, is there anything that struck you, or anything that was something out of expectation, or you might think that all of discussion points were expected, or when you heard about the discussion in groups other than you were involved, if there is anything that you realized as new or innovative. So those are the questions that I'd like to ask of those 4 speakers. And then to Professor Emory and Professor Elstub, what we should work on, as well as the important landmarks, so to speak, to be achieved, and also to make the citizens' assemblies more effective, what should be done various ideas and the points to be emphasized were identified, and there were so many points made. Among them, if there are any points that you consider in particular as important, it doesn't have to be just one. You can point out several points. So that's what I like to ask Stephen and Emori-san to point out. Sorry for speaking too long. According to the sequence of seating, so first from the reporters or the panelists who also gave their presentations on behalf of their own locality, starting from Saito-san, please. Saito of Tokorozawa City. Thank you very much for your presentations. I'm quite impressed with some issues that were raised by group number 2, I think. That's about the goals. If goal is not clearly defined, then that could result in confusion afterwards. I think such a comment was made, and I quite agree with that. So with all the panelists and those engaged in the administration operation, they have to share the common goal and understanding on the common goals. Otherwise, then you will be at a loss as to why you are there to begin with, what you're talking about. It has to be clearly defined in the beginning and has to be maintained until the end. That's the very first thing that should be defined, and I can't agree more. And I belong to group number 1. And we talked about random sampling, and what struck me was that not only random sampling, self-selection could be another way for participation. And stakeholders could be also involved. Actually, that was my original idea as well. If we try to keep the principle of the random sampling so that we can reproduce the mini publics, from time to time I felt somewhat uneasy because that may result in exclusion of those people that were willing to join. And those people that were not selected, or those people who did not receive invitation, and then this is something that has nothing to do with them. Yet, I thought that those people, if they were interested in joining, then they could be included. But then in the course of discussion, I heard that that is not the case, and therefore, in the case of the Tokorozawa, we kept a random sampling, and finally, I was convinced that the random sampling was a way to go. So those are the points that were quite impressive to me. Thank you very much. In fact, your comments really reflect discussion. In the morning, Saito-san, when you gave a report, and you emphasized the random sampling process, and that was a kind of discovery to me. And after hearing your comment, I thought from time to time you thought whether that was really the way to go, but now you're finally convinced of that. Thank you. Now, Endo-san, if you can tell us about your impression after hearing the presentations or after participating in other groups. Yes, I will try to be brief. Endo from Atsugi City. I have to say, this is quite a challenge. In fact, when we did this, this was really a groping in our way in the darkness, so to speak, a trial and error, because we were all lay people there. But then the difficulty of deliberation, the time, the skill of facilitator, together with information provision, whether it is relevant or not, those points were raised, and I renewed my awareness that those are, in fact, the important issues that are rather difficult. But now that we have more experiences, more case studies, there must be a better way to go. I think that is gradually being clearly defined. And those people that are selected, I gathered together with the organizers, but in order to have wide communication about the discussion that is going on there, and then mass media and the city government, they have to consider the better way to spread the knowledge about this kind of initiative. I understand that there are some journalists, including the journalists in my group as well. So how can we involve mass media in our initiative? I think that is important.
So that whatever occasions, make the best use of this system and mechanism, inclusive of the budget available to us or the grant available to us. Willing local government, willing citizens have to be given the opportunity to engage. I hope we can have a good system to enable that. Thank you. The final point that you have made came from the actual person and who experienced the assembly in Atsugi, in this citizen-led assembly, the grant as well as the support coming from the local government. And we researchers say that from a theoretical point of view, but you have actually implemented the assembly with the citizen-led. So that was really significant. Kato-san, over to you. Tsushi Hayama. I'm involved in the Climate Citizens Assembly. I'm Kato. Listening to all these report back sessions in the past several years, within a very short span of time, the activities of the Climate Citizens Assemblies are taking place at different locations. It is spreading. That is how I understood. I myself, yes, once again, recognize that it's spreading, and also deliverables has been presented. And this can be a very good reference that others can utilize. Some have commented on that point. So our activities can be a reference to others. No. The feedback that we have heard said that they have deepened the understanding among the participants, which led to the behavioral change. Those involved in the operations, I'm really happy to feel those comments. Another point that I noticed is that, and this was discussed in my group, random selection, random sampling. When I heard of this, this is such an innovative approach without any bias, not just the participations by those having an interest. Some may not have a high level of interest, can participate. This is such a democratic approach. However, listening to today's discussion, to ensure the representativeness might be changed. Those who did not open the envelope, there may be some people who did not open the envelope, and or who those people who do not have a leeway to participate. So how to collect the voices of people who did not participate is one of the challenge. So random sampling is a wonderful method, but we should not just rely on that. There must be some other channel to collect voices of others, and also self-nominations may be another approach. So we should not just stick to this model, but let varieties of people to participate. That can be one of the area of research. Thank you. That is a very big homework that you have presented. Later on, Stephen-san and Professor Emory will address the same thing. So this is taken as the challenge, and we look forward to their comment. Tokuda-san from Tsukuba. Thank you. Listening to the presentations of each group, inclusion was what was most impressive. I believe there are two aspects in the inclusion. One is within the venue, inclusiveness in the venue. The people in the venue will be heard. So it is a role of the facilitations in the narrow sense of the word, and also to be included in the fora, external or wider concept of inclusions now with random sampling and to create the mini public or the microcosm of the society. But in order to create that representing the wider population, we have to, first of all, have a good understanding of the attribute of the people. Take, for example, income, probably not in Japan, but try to create the mini public by the different attributes. Take, for example, do you own your house or is it the rental base? And or how about the educational level? Is it really possible to obtain such information or the attribute information? Unless we have an access to the information, it's difficult to have the minority being included. In order to overcome this, one possible method is, take, for example, there is a case from Ireland, door knocking method. Rather than sending out the invitation letter, knock the doors once in every several house to ask whether do you fall under certain attribute, or social workers who will do the recruiting on the street. So that may be effective way. Now, in case of Tsukuba, there are many non-Japanese people living in our city. So the foreign nationals, if they were picked up in the lottery, we have placed a sticker on the envelope. And if there is a language barrier which hinders or make one hesitate to participate, and this is a approach that we were willing to take, and we did not actually implement this. But this was a case I'm from Scotland, I believe. The interpreter shall be brought by yourself. You can bring your friend, anyone is okay. And that person, the same remunerations have to be paid. So that was the intended approach that we were willing to take. Because it's very difficult for the organizers to prepare everything. But this is the approach that we were willing to take in order to ascertain the inclusiveness. That is it for myself. Thank you. Assembly of Tsukuba's feature is that, as I mentioned, well, it's the research institute led. Well, at least that is one of the strong features of Tsukuba. What is the significance of that is that based upon the past failures, and you collected the best practice throughout the world, have a learning and then reflect that, and also that is a research institution led or the researcher led. That is a strength. So what to do about the inclusiveness? And thank you for citing a very specific point. Thank you. So then, you have replied, made a reaction. Some have to be taken as the research challenge. Now, inclusive of what you have heard, and now that you have listened to all the discussions and all the points raised by different groups, and also the case reporter presenters made the reactions. Please pick up some of the important points. It can be one or several points. Emori-san and Steve. And Emori-san first. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for all these reactions. If not, well, I will ask Stephen to make a general comment. And let me speak from more narrow perspective. From my capacity, for one thing, from the viewpoint of the information provider, I was involved in the assemblies. From that perspective, let me make some comments. It depends on the assemblies that's been implemented, how to select the people who provide the information. I'm sure that there is a good deliberations before making the selection of the expert. The system of selections may differ from one locality to the other. Take, for example, steering committee might have had the discussions, they may be government-led. And for this particular persons, well, ad hoc assignment may be made, or probably lack of time to have a sufficient preparations. It may vary. Now, listening to the cases from UK, it's balanced from the different perspective, particularly those providing information or persons who make the comment from a certain perspective. There is a clear distinctions between the two. Now, if we are to hold the future assemblies, this is the area that we have to review. So how to select the people who provide the information, what know-how, expertise is required, what are the points that we have to be mindful of in making that selections. If this are to take place with a smaller community, you may not have time to spend. So it's case by case. But we can learn from others on this point. If this are to be done on a full scale basis, this is something that needs to be established, particularly on how the information provider will give an influence to the discussions or the deliberations, and how selections was made to the information provider. The transparency of that selections can be one of the issue. And so that is one concern that I have.
Second point to mention is that, so moving forward from here, in order to spread the Climate Citizens Assembly in Japan, there are different opinions that were voiced, and I agree to a lot of them. Say subsidies. Is it going to be prefectural or the national government that would be providing subsidies and actually hold these assemblies and actually provide that? And of course, there is an issue of whether the national government would be hosting that, but perhaps the Ministry of Environment could be in a supporting role so that and of course that a lot of municipalities and climate assemblies is something to do basically, and what was interesting to know was that the people on the government side, the administration, had a lot to learn. I think those people in the municipal governments also always position the citizens as people just sort of complaining, but it was not like that. The people working in the municipalities, the officials had a lot to learn from the citizens, and I think that was good, and that was my sort of meaning there. Thank you very much.
Feedback and also emphasize what you think important from the output from the group discussions.
Thank you. Very happy to. Firstly, I'd just like to thank everyone in the room, the small groups that let me listen into their conversations, all the presentations we've had, my fellow panelists. I'm learning lots. I've got 8 points that I'd like to make. If that's too many, feel free to interrupt me when I'm out of time. The first point is what I'm seeing here of learning about these cases is that the standard features of climate assemblies are being implemented and many times. So that's great to see. Second point is you're grappling with the same issues that we are in the UK, in Europe, in terms of the practice. So you've caught up very quickly, how to, with facilitation, how to deal with louder members, how to deal with quieter members, what to do about information overload, how best to manage the time within the process. What about no-go issues, whether that be from the government or the assembly members themselves? So these are the same sort of issues that we're trying to work on. One thing I think is slightly different is the uptake on this point 3, uptake of invitations in Japan seems lower, certainly than in the UK. I'm not saying it's high there either, but I would say it's higher. And my concern is this is leading to skewed assemblies, that there's too selective who's deciding to participate. Take the point about Ireland. I wouldn't do the door knocking thing. I think that's more exclusive. In Ireland, they ended up with a husband and wife through the door knocking mechanism. So I think the letters is still the way forward. So point 4, part of the problem, and many groups mentioned this, was low public awareness of the assemblies and indeed what they are. And if that can be increased, maybe more people will take up the invitations. This is really important. To achieve this, we need more media coverage, more media exposure. As I mentioned this morning, we we need to invest as much time, effort, budget into the communication of the assemblies as we are doing so into the organisation of them. And this is important because, again, many of the presentations mentioned that not only is participating in assembly leading to attitude change of the assembly members, but behaviour change as well. This is quite remarkable. For example, in Climate Assembly UK, the research I've done, we followed up 2 years after the assembly, and many of the assembly members have still changed their behaviour, so that it's durable changes as well. However, as I also mentioned earlier, we are dealing with small numbers of people. We want to scale this up across society more so. So we need the public who aren't participating in the assemblies to be aware of them. Point 5, it's great to see, I think, the policy impact of the climate assemblies here seems very good, greater than in the UK on the face of it. I think we probably need to drill down and actually see if that is the case, but it's great to see. And surprising as well, in the sense that my research suggests that in order to achieve good policy uptake, actually public awareness is often required, because it puts the pressure on the government to adopt the policies, whereas if the public aren't aware, it's too easy for them to ignore. So that's great to see. Where's point 6? So I've heard the term dialogue mentioned a lot today. I've heard the term deliberation mentioned a lot today. But I think it might be dialogue that's going on in the climate assemblies. This is the same as within the UK. I've made this point to lots of practitioners there as well, so it's no different. But they're related but different types of communication. Dialogue is about inclusive discussions, about coming to understand each other's positions, but not about trying to resolve those differences. Deliberation is about trying to resolve those differences through justification, and that's a crucial element to try and include in the discussions through facilitation, if you can. We're seeing a large number of recommendations being produced by the climate assemblies in Japan. As I said, the same's happening in the UK. But this can be difficult to achieve accountability when the government gets sent such a long sort of shopping list of what people want. And I think it's because dialogue is happening and not deliberation. So deliberation encourages people to make trade-offs, encourages people to prioritize. So I would encourage you to, those of you who are organizers, facilitators, to try and get that deliberation in there, where the recommendations can be prioritized to perhaps a smaller number. At the moment, from what I learned about the processes today, voting is the main mechanism to try and narrow down the numbers, but that should be the last resort, and it should really be achieved through deliberation prior to that. Those are similarities I see from what I've learned today. Variations in practice in Japan is that I think in some cases there's been a formal response from the government to the Climate Assembly. I think that's really good practice, so that's something that could perhaps be standardized. I think some assemblies are sampling on climate attitudes. I think that's really important. I'd encourage that to be a standardized practice. Otherwise, especially with, you know, we mentioned about the low take-up of invitations, the danger is you're getting people who are the most concerned about climate change participating in your assemblies, and we want a mixture of people as well. And so sampling on climate attitudes can help do that. I think some assemblies are having a steering committee which are making decisions about information and scope. And I would again encourage that to be standardized. I think it's really important. It can gain trust from the politicians, but the public as well. There's a lot of skepticism about these sort of processes, amongst the political class and amongst the public. And a steering committee, which in itself is balanced, and then making decisions about what information should go in there, can allay some of the fears that politicians and the public have. And then that takes me to the last and final point, eighth and final point. And this is, it's great to see that you're evaluating these processes. You've shared survey results from the assembly members. That's great. And they're having the positive responses. But that's what we would expect. This is will be the best public engagement processes these people have ever engaged in. They're designed to be so. That doesn't necessarily mean they're good enough or that they can't be improved, or that it's good practice by Citizens Assembly standards. So what I would encourage is to always have the evaluation, but look for external evaluation as well. Otherwise, you're marking your own homework. But the evaluation is absolutely crucial in terms of building up information, learning, and evidence base for improvement of these processes. The OECD have produced a guide for evaluation of citizens' assemblies. I'd encourage that as a starting point. And then just to conclude, I'd very much like to thank the translators today. It's been fantastic. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Stephen. どうもありがとうございました。皆さんどうもありがとうございます。
Thank you very much for your presentation. And as Emori-san and Stephen mentioned, so many important points have been covered. And so from here, it is 4:50. We only have about 30 minutes. So from the panelists, if there's anything that you want to mention based on what was mentioned by the panelists, if there is anything you want to mention, please do so. If not, we'd like to open it up to the floor. Is there anything that the panelists would like to add or comment on?
Yes, Professor Emery, please. The difference between dialogue versus deliberation that was referred to by Stephen, that was something that vaguely formed in myself, and now that was clearly defined. The dialogue that is important, not to deny the other party's position, that's important, but at the same time, to point out that my position is different from yours, that has to be also identified. By so doing, discussion could be further deepened, and I thought that was the important as a next step to go to follow dialogue. Any other reactions from other panelists? Thank you very much. If not, we have a little bit more than 20 minutes. So I'd like to now open discussion to the floor. Anyone who wishes to take a floor first and ask questions? Of course, there could be questions, or the point that I'd like to suggest for discussion is that in the future, in Japan, from now on, for better use of climate citizens assemblies, what can we do? And that's a point that I'd like to suggest so that you can emphasize what was discussed in the working group or the group discussion, or any points made by other panelists or whatever. Please. Any questions or comments are welcome. Yes, there are two people raising a hand. So starting from the person that is seated toward the front, Sato-san, I think. Please. Keiichi Sato of Hitotsubashi University, thank you very much for your discussion. I'd like to thank all the panelists. About deliberation that was raised, something that I'd like to ask about your comments based upon your experience. To me, this is the point that the Japanese are least good at. In general, whenever we're engaged in dialogue, first we try to come up with ideas, and then we try not to deny other parties' positions. And then when we try to identify priority, that's so difficult because we can't deny other positions. So as a way to facilitate, how can we bring it up to deliberation? If there is any way for deliberation, any method? And the second point is that, especially in the case of those that are in charge at the municipality, local governments, if deliberation was actually achieved, then there could be some side effect as well, I think. That is, in some cases, your positions may not be reflected in the final result. So based upon your experience, whether the deliberation was actually possible, and what kind of side effects you can think of to realize deliberation based upon your experience. If you can share with us your experiences. Thank you very much, Sato-san. So as a theory, how can we facilitate a deliberation? So maybe we'd better ask Stephen or anyone else, or anyone, I think. Okay, so to any panelists, but first, the Stephen, if there is any kind of theory to facilitate deliberation. It could be different from facilitation in general. So if you can share with us your views about facilitation for deliberation.
Yeah, sure. It's so dialogue and deliberation, as I mentioned, different styles of communication, and therefore they do require different styles and techniques of facilitation, and actually even design of the process for that matter. I mean, it's hard to go into the details on specific facilitation techniques, but there is a literature on this, which I'm happy to share if you want to follow up. But it's the crucial thing is about putting justification at the heart of the process. So it's not just enough for people to have an opinion, express it. Yes, the others, assembly members need to show some respect to that, but they don't have to agree with it. And it's the justifications that are provided should be the basis on whether they agree with it or not. So it's making sure, you know, when people assert an opinion, you say, you follow up and say, oh yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about why? And then you can ask the, what do others think about that? Don't just let them say, oh, I like it or dislike it. Oh, again, why? And then you're starting to create that deliberative exchange. But there are more specific design processes, which I won't go into now due to time, but I can follow up, as I mentioned. You mentioned the danger of, well, what about the minority? What about their views? Are they going to be captured? And you're right, that is a concern. So what can be good practice is to include like what we call a minority report. So this is what most people in the assembly thought, but there were some people who had these views. And when you report, you give the reasons on both sides as well. And then other people engaging with it who weren't in the assembly can make their mind up based upon that.
はい、どうもありがとうございます。と
Thank
いう
you. So, justification. And that's what you said. Why is that? If it is clarified, that's an important point, and also minority report to be produced as practice. Now, after hearing that, and Sato-san, you said if it is going to be introduced here in Japan, that would be quite challenging. That is deliberation, according to Stephen, if it is to be pursued. Suppose that there are two opinions, A and B. You can't achieve both because of the time and economic or financial the limitations. So which one to choose? That's what has to be deliberated in Citizens Assembly, if that's the case. And then for Sato-san, those panelists should have also experienced such challenging or difficult situations. Well, Tokuda-san, you were smiling, and you were a facilitator, so if you can share with us your experience. Thank you. I'd like to begin with assumption, and this is somewhat overlapping with what Stephen said. I always try to keep in my mind, and something that I'd like to ask you, for those who are here, I'd like to suggest no longer use the word discussion, although discussion has been mentioned again and again. Whenever we say discussion or giron in Japanese, the one situation that will be for the consensus formation of forming a consensus, and then there is debate. Those two might be mixed with each other. Therefore, I'd like to suggest not to use the word discussion for now. Then what could be the alternative? That's rather difficult to choose, but anyway, with that assumption, what we can say about Japan, there has to be a conversation. Otherwise, there is no dialogue. And without dialogue, there is no deliberation. that means we need time. And that's the most difficult part, because if you try to schedule a long time for meeting, then you might be afraid that there may be a fewer participation if the meeting is too long. Still, time is important. We have to accumulate our experiences spending time. And some technical aspects and something as what should be promised, yes, and. So first say yes and accept the other party's position, but then come up with some suggestion. So this is like a ball catch. Receive the ball and then you throw the ball again as a suggestion and justification. Well, in Japanese, when you are asked why, and then you might feel as if you are accused, but let us consider the techniques of how we can say it in a different way. Like, for instance, I'm wondering what is the essence behind that or something like that. And by using those techniques, it could lead to some deliberation, I think. Thank you very much. That was quite significant as implication. The point suggested by Sato-san, I'm sure that Saito-san or Kato-san or Endo-san, I'm sure that there are a lot that you'd like to comment on. And maybe among the participants who are here today, if you have experienced attending Climate Assembly, either as a facilitator or as a participant or as an observer, if you have any reaction to what Sato-san asked as a question, panelists or the participants, if you have any suggestions, yes, please, Murakami-san. Sorry. Murakami is my name. I'm from IDEP, and I'd like to share with you the case in Kawasaki. In Kawasaki City, consumption, mobility, and residence or housing, those three themes were selected, and we spent 2 days for extensive discussion on each theme. And on day one, there was a discussion. Well, I should not say discussion. So ideas were raised on day one, and they were categorized and organized, and then they were given as a feedback to the participants, and then the votes were casted by the participants.
And also, it was 5-level voting, agree, disagree, and why do you agree or disagree? And Secretariat also compiled the different responses. And if there are dividing opinions, we also sort them out and send them to the participant prior to next meeting. So these are the points, and these are some conflicting points. So why don't we deepen the discussion in the next session? So that was quite a work, but that can be one of the approaches that can be taken. Thank you. What Sato-san has mentioned in your questions, any clue to the facilitation? Now listening to what you have mentioned, facilitations and is the role to be performed by the facilitator. But Murakami-san has mentioned it's not just about the facilitations. During the meeting, however, in the preparations and of the meeting, there is a way to deepen the deliberations. And sometimes it may be a bit difficult to be adopted here in Japan, but you may be able to take the approach that Murakami-san has mentioned and to pursue what is the intent behind in order to further deepen the deliberation. On the same point, are there any other opinions? Saito-san, please. Saito from Tokorozawa City. In Tokorozawa City, what we experience, based on our experience, first of all, whether we can reach deliberations, I initially thought that that seems to be very difficult, and after conducting the assembly, I feel the same way. Whether I was a high school student, or the older people, or the elderlies who participated in the assembly. I'm not sure if this is a feature of the Japanese national, but I should not say discussion, but people are not used to constructive conversations. So many people are not accustomed to having a constructive conversations. You may be one of them. Take, for example, if you sit in a local municipality meeting, is there a constructive discussion? Communication taken away? Probably not, but people get together and will it lead to deliberations? It seems to be very difficult. That is why we should not interrupt, we should not deny. That is a rule that we have set. Well, we should not have such a rule, but in order to, I should not say discussions once again, in order to have a constructive communications, these are unnecessary rules, but we dare to set a rule. So what we done at Tokoroza City in the first session, it was like a game. The practice for the group work. So the first session, we did not go deeper on the theme. Well, this is a grand issue of the climate change. And what are your views? We had a practice session. So to generate ideas and then consider what are the challenges and issues and then consider the solutions. So these are the steps that were discussed. And we tried to deepen the conversation. So that was the practice sessions. We thought that people could go through those practices. But this seems to be the common issue. So I'm not really sure if we can reach the stage of deliberation. I'm doubtful. Thank you. Thank you very much for very candid opinion. Others, panelists, if you have any further comment, please, Masashi-san. Tokuda-san already mentioned something very similar. Even if you do not deny, you can have a very smooth communication. This seems to be very good. Well, people tend to deny others, but even if you don't deny, in order to change for the better, if you feel uncomfortable, then ask, why do you think that way? You can raise the questions and ask for the reason, and then try to come up with a common recommendations. And so to identify the commonality is something that not so many Japanese people are accustomed to. I sympathize with others' idea. And you should express that with a diverse audience and to engage in such a communications. If it can be accustomed to that, we can further facilitate the communication. Thank you. Yes, I agree. Stephen used the term justification, but put it differently, the common ground, the common foundations, you should seek for the common ground. There are several things that we should be mindful of, or in order to have a deliberations, what is it that we will be able to do? Well, thank you very much for giving us different ideas. But what Saito-san has mentioned, there are still many difficulties. We could confirm that coming from the actual voices and from the site. We still have 10 more minutes. I see another person's raising his or her hand. So why don't we move on to take up some other point? My name is Kashiwa. I may not be organized in sharing my thought, but based upon the discussions that we've been having, uptake of the invitations is rather low in Japan. Those selected as members of the meeting, but other people, their level of the interest, their level of awareness may be one of the issues. Well, inclusive of all these points, still here in Japan, Climate Citizens Assembly, this method itself is not well known yet. That seems to be the fundamental issue. Now, if I may add, media, the press is not covering. Newspaper, TV, news programs does not pick up the assembly. That's another point. Kilo Best movement was taken up at France. That led to the nationwide Climate Citizens Assembly. Well, this was widely discussed in the society. That seems to be the basis. Same thing in UK. Extinction Rebellion voted for labor in the lower house, and this have led to holding of the Citizens Assembly. And so we should recognize the significance of that. And that is lacking in Japan. I believe that is written by Professor Emory. So from the different perspective, the low capability of the movement coming from the civic society, and also there is an issue of the press they're not covering. Take, for example, the press is not even covering, even though there is a demonstration taking place in front of the Diet. So these in themselves are creating the low awareness. Not so many people know about the assembly. So what are your views on this point? I want to ask your opinions on this point. Another point, Professor Emory, you talk about the transparency of selecting the information provider. That is also important. One point significant about the Climate Assembly is that based upon the scientific knowledge coming from the community, that is a significant, well, current policy in Japan. Just some stakeholders, particularly METI, and those powerful stakeholders or existing people in the energy, they're very vocal to set the course for the policy. But something opposite have to take place, originating from the local community. That in itself has certain significance. So in a way that is convincing to the citizen, and to translate the expertise and knowledge to the daily living of the citizens. At the same time, this can be the starting point. The proposal coming from the Citizens Assembly, can we achieve the zero emissions in 2050? We have to raise the bar moving forward. Take for example, in Europe, this is a repeated process. And that is necessary here in Japan. Sorry, my opinion might not be organized, but thank you very much, Kashiwa-san. The discussion point about the former comment was what within the meeting. Now, we've been sharing about on how the Climate Citizens Assembly has been held, and outside of this meeting, on how is this Citizens Assembly can be positioned. That's what you have mentioned.
And this is a very big point that was raised. So from the panelists, if there's anything that you want to mention in response to that. So in order for the Climate Citizens Assembly be taken up, or what kind of a positioning that the climate assemblies would be made in society, more wider society. And I think there's the role of media, that what they can play. And so if there's anything that you can mention on that. And for Professor Emory, the role of experts, of course, they have a position or a specific role there. And Stephen, if there's from the external dimension. So what would be the sort of external sort of aspect of the Climate Citizens Assembly, how it would be positioned outside the assembly itself? And I think this will be the last point raised. So I would like to hear your take on what was made. And also, lastly, we'd like to have Maggie make some comment at the very last part. So this is Saito from Tokorozawa. So the positioning of the Climate Citizens Assembly, and I'm part of the municipal government, so I'll be talking from that position. So I mentioned that we didn't go to the deliberation stage, and I think that's fine because the citizens that we have, the people, older people, younger people, students, to actually, I think it was very important that people can actually express what is on their mind. And I did mention that we did not make deliberations. I may have much, but to be able to express your views and for the city to actually accept that or absorb that. So even if there are diverse opinions, there were some silly opinions as well, but that is an important opinion of the citizen. And that strong resolve was something that was important for a government official to be involved in initiatives such as the Climate Citizens Assembly. I'm Endo from Atsui City, or Atsui. So for us, it was just ordinary citizens raising their voice and being involved in this initiative. So different to Tokorozawa City. And so the examples of Tokorozawa City, so their resolve in accepting the citizens' opinions, I think it's commendable. Not necessarily all of the municipalities are there. Me as an ordinary citizen, I don't place that much trust in the government. I don't think everyone is as good as Tokorozawa City. And if all of the municipalities decide to do Climate Citizens Assembly, I'm sort of afraid that some municipalities may abuse that. And in Atsui, so ourselves, and we were able to build a good relationship between ourselves and the city officials. So that was what we were able to do. But my position is that I want the citizens to take the lead, not the government. So it's good that the city or the municipality was involved because it's important. Without their involvement, it won't be reflected in the policy. But I think it'll be ideal to have the citizens take the lead, including what is going to be discussed. I think to have that kind of a mechanism would be ideal. That's my personal opinion on that. Thank you. On what was pointed out, in Japan, the media doesn't take it up, and there's a weak sort of capacity or capability of these citizen groups, and also was pointed out that we're not at a deliberation stage, and I thought that was interesting. But this activity of Climate Citizens Assembly that started in Europe and bringing it to Japan, and to expect the citizens to be able to do deliberations would be something we might be asking too much, at least at this stage. And Murakami-san mentioned Kawasaki. So the preparation before the assembly, there was a lot of effort put in that. And that is pretty typical of how Japanese people behave, try to avoid conflict. But such preparation, so these people, how Japanese people behave. Of course, there would be a regional uniqueness. So actually adopting to the features of be it culture, be it a region, I think that is something important as we move forward and adopt this. Thank you.
this Tokuda. So, and Kashiwa-san mentioned about uptake, low uptake. So the reason why there's low uptake is that we have not experienced a sort of rich discussion or dialogue. So we have never really had, Japanese people haven't really had the experience of a rich dialogue or discussion. So I think it's important to increase the opportunity for people to be involved in rich and enjoy and discussions that you can enjoy. And deliberation is sort of like criticism as well. I think it's not criticism that we would avoid, but negating people or disproving people, that is something that we want to avoid. Being critical, that's necessary, and actually it's fun. So the word hihan, criticize, people actually cringe when they hear the word criticize. It's sort of more looking deeply into the subject and say if we see a spread of the Climate Citizens Assembly to sort of create civil society and that would contribute to the involvement of democracy. And I think through these activities, I hope that we could see a healthy growth of the civil society. Kashiwa-san, thank you very much for your feedback. I think it's a very important point that you've mentioned. And I have been involved in the activities starting from Sapporo City, and compared to the UK and France, there isn't much pressure from the citizens, so I don't think that the national governments would be willing to do this. That is at least how I see it right now. Having mentioned that, and in Japan, the background to why we've seen sort of more municipalities working on the Climate Citizens Assembly. So this sort of the head of municipalities, I think some people have taken this as an interesting way to reflect people's opinion on policy, and that's why we've seen the take. But the head of these municipal governments, but there would have been people who have actually recommended this to the mayors or head of municipalities or whatnot, recommending these books from Professor Mikami or whatnot. And so in Japan, there were people who thought this would be useful, who started this movement, and I'm sure, and I think there was someone like that in Tokuzawa City who started this movement, and so sort of bottom up as well as top down, and I think that brings us where we are right now.
And I believe that represents one of the important examples, precedents of the bottom-up approach. So I would say that we don't have to give up hope. In Japan, there may be less the pressure from citizens, and I really wish that there will be more interest shown by the citizens. And despite that, still we are seeing that those activities are spreading nationwide. And that may be the Japanese way to go. And also, about the involvement of experts, Kashiwa-san also referred to that. Creating a steering committee, trying to ensure transparency and to maintain a balance, and then choose the information providers. If such is done, then it could be rather counterproductive to what you were thinking about. Suppose that you selected experts who show great interest in renewables. For decarbonization, renewables should be promoted, and therefore let's invite experts on renewables. On the other hand, if renewables are introduced they so rapidly overnight, then there could be some side effects, and therefore, to strike a right balance, we may have to choose the people of different opinions. In such a case, those citizens that are eager to promote renewables, their expectation may not be always met. And then there may be certain tension that could be generated on the agenda, so that from dialogue to deliberation, the kind of transition might be born out of such transition. Whether the deliberation here in Japan could evolve in such a way, whether there is such a desire, expectation, I don't know. But so far, if I look at the points that were raised so far, there will be the important the trigger for moving us to the next stage in the climate assemblies in Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, some really good questions, some really good points there. I'll talk a bit about the media coverage because I do think it's important, and it's a massive challenge. And I've already mentioned a bit more about us having to take the communication side of assemblies more seriously. So I'm going to talk a bit about the media itself. I mean, we do actually have at least one journalist in the room, so we should also perhaps ask them on this. But the problem is our media systems are so competitive that everything needs to be sensationalized to focus on drama and competition. And when politics delivers that, the media will cover it. It actually puts the public off politics. It's not what they want to see. At the same time, will they tune in if that drama, that sensationalism, that competition isn't there? And this is part of the problem for a citizens' assembly, is because it's a new way of doing politics. It's completely different to the party politics that we're all used to, but also all a bit fed up with as well. So it is a real challenge. It's crucial to achieve, and I do think I've spoken to journalists in the UK about this, and they do say is if there's going to be influence of the assembly, then there's a story to tell. So that's been happening in Japan from some of the cases I've been hearing about, and yet that media coverage hasn't followed. But a couple of interesting cases for Europe to show the differences. Take France. Now, Macron, he promised to implement the recommendations from that climate assembly without filter. Now, that didn't happen. In fact, it proved very controversial as a result. But the association with such a high-profile politician, plus that promise of influence, made it a big story, got lots of coverage. Public awareness in France of that climate assembly was very, very high. In contrast, Climate Assembly UK actually still got a reasonable amount of media coverage, more so than most mini publics in the UK, and yet we did a public opinion survey, and awareness was very, very low, but it didn't have that promise of influence and didn't really achieve influence either. So I do think that's crucial. The other point, some people are hopeful that institutionalization of climate assemblies, making them permanent, making them routine, might help. If it's part of the normal political infrastructure, perhaps it will pick up a bit more attention. I would hope that would be great. It could go the other way, though. It could be, well, this isn't new. It's always there. What's the story? Why report on it? So we'll have to watch what happens in the few cases that we have of these permanent bodies, such as Brussels Permanent Climate Assembly that I mentioned this morning, to see what happens there. And if I may, I just want to finish up with one last comment about on the previous conversation about deliberation and about culture and whether Japan rather has the right culture for deliberation. I've been working in this field for quite a long time, and I was in Ireland talking about mini publics before they'd had any mini publics, before they had their first famous citizens' assemblies. Question for the audience was, "Oh, we can't really do that here in Ireland. We don't have the culture for it. Look what's happened there." I was working in Scotland previously, and when I was teaching my students about mini publics, their response was, "Oh, we don't have the culture for that in Scotland. It wouldn't really work here. They've had several citizens' assemblies now, many different types of mini publics. It does work there. I'm convinced it's exactly the same for Japan as well. Thank you.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you.
それではちょうど時間ですね。はい、ちょうど時間になりました。
It is about time to finish our discussion, but with some time granted us. Maggie, can you hear us? Are you there,
Yes, I
Maggie?
can. Can you hear me?
Could-
Yeah, I can hear you. And
Great.
the topic of this workshop is actually regarding the climate assembly and climate democracy. And so it's like, Japan, UK mutual learning on these topics. So I'd like just ask you impression or comment after you listen to the discussion here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, it's been amazing to hear, and thank you for inviting me. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be there in person with you, but I have an impression of a huge number of people very involved and an enormous amount of energy. This feels like a very spreading movement, a very important movement. So it's great to see the Citizens Climate Assemblies happening. And from the feedback, it was good to see that people are understanding climate change is not a separate subject. It's part of health, it's part of quality of life, it's part of environment, it's part of the way that we live. So that was an important message. I think everybody was saying the same thing, that the citizens' assemblies need a lot of resource, a lot of time and money. They also need very good expert advice, and the assemblies will only be as good as the quality of the expert advice that's put there and the data that you have locally. I think everybody has mentioned as well the risk of leaving out many citizens. You select a small group, where is everybody else? How do you reach them? I was fascinated by the idea of a national assembly. I think that is a really interesting concept. I take Stephen's point that if it becomes a permanent thing, it may get ignored, but I think that is a valuable way forward. I will ask, as I always do, are there other ways to engage, to work with existing groups and recognize the priorities of groupings of people that already exist? And if you talk to people in their workplaces, in their homes, in their communities, that can be a good way to reach them. I suppose the key point from me is we have a climate emergency. Our climate is falling apart and our life depends on that. We have set targets for net zero by 2030, certainly by 2050. So time is the most important thing. We are running out of time to save the world. That's a very dramatic statement, but I believe it's true. So we need to reach all citizens and we need to engage all citizens. How do we reach beyond the selected assembly members to make sure that everybody has a voice? I would also say we need to move from talk into action. How do we ensure that the citizens' assemblies have an impact? Public engagement is only valuable if it can lead to policy changes, to behaviour changes, to changes from government, to funding and resources coming forward to tackle climate change. You are creating a fantastic voice with the citizens' assemblies, but the assemblies need teeth as well, because climate change is so urgent. Will government listen? Will business and companies, will they change their behaviours because of the assemblies? Will people change their behaviours? Will the media become involved? I think there was some interesting discussion there, and certainly, as Stephen says, in the UK, the media like a story, they like some drama. Calm representation doesn't get listened to, but if people go out and stop the roads, they will take notice. How do we make calm, rational discussion from the assemblies into action that will actually change things? there's lots more to say, but I don't want to take too much of your time. So I would say thank you again for inviting me, and keep up the excellent work. You're all amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maggie, for your highly suggestive comments. I guess it's 8:30 in the UK, right?
It is, yes.
Yeah. So thank you
more-
very much for joining us from early morning. マギー・ボサンケットさんでした。ありがとうございました。
Thank you.
そ
So
れで
that
は皆
was
さん
Maggie Basanket. Thank you. So we've had, so we would like to thank the people who have given us very fruitful input, Stephen, and the panelists. So a lot of applause there. And I would give the microphone back to the moderator. So Professor Mikami, the panelists, thank you very much. And lastly, closing remarks. There's been a change in the program. So we will have from Institute for Dialogue of Environmental Policy, we'll have Murakami. As was introduced, I am Chisato Murakami from the Institute for Dialogue of Environmental Policy. Mr. Yanagishita was scheduled to make closing remarks today, but last night he was injured. He can't stand up apparently. So in place of him, so I would like to make some closing remarks. So this is a message from Mr. Yagishita, so I would read it on his behalf. Now, before that, if you can allow me to make some comments and impression of this meeting. I have been involved in this Institute for Dialogue of Environmental Policy from about 5 years ago, and have taken on the challenge of starting the Climate Citizens Assemblies. I've been the facilitator in Zushi Hayama and also for Tokorozawa, Atsugi, and Tsukuba. I've been a supporter, supporting the holding of the Climate Citizens Assembly. Now, there is a lot of trial and error, and I've seen a lot of positive responses, but there were a lot of areas where I was not able to see a breakthrough, and there were lots of challenges. But to be given, I have not had the opportunity to think deeply about what it is that I've faced. But today, to actually have academics as well as practitioners come together, and also have an expert from UK, which is advancing in this area. So I think this was a good opportunity to think that. So there was a lot that left an impression. So how it's going to be led by the citizens, the difference between deliberation and dialogue, not to say discussion, and also the results of the Climate Citizens Assembly to be reflected in policy is important. So those subjects left an impression. And I hope that we could have a similar conferences like this next year and the next. And if we could have meetings to enhance the capabilities of facilitators. Now, there is a report of Zushi Hayama that actually Tsunagishita is going to introduce. So we have it here. And so I'll be reading the closing remarks from Mr. Yagishita on his behalf. So in closing this meeting,
representing IDEP, I'd like to talk about that, to realize a decarbonized society. To everyone knows that innovation of technology is important because the industry is facing harsh competition to remain in this position. But I think that what is more important, or perhaps most important than the innovation on decarbonization, is basically to change fundamentally the way of living that was reliant on fossil fuel. And the resolve of the citizens would be the engine to change and to actually see a mature democracy there. And also to have a forum to have deep discussion and deliberation. In that sense, I think Japan is well behind the advanced economies in this area. Now, IDEP, from 2015, we have had Professor Mikami, and with the support of IGES, we have been working on areas on the development of deliberations there. And in 2019, we actually have heard that France has been working on the Climate Citizens Assembly, starting from the Yellow Vest movement. And from then, I was had been thinking of how Japan could develop and have a Climate Citizens Assembly take root in Japanese society. In that sense, those people involved to have the younger people come today to actually have discussions, and I'm very deeply moved to have this opportunity. And we cannot just be complacent in actually having the Climate Citizens Assembly, and it's important to actually have results to accelerate our efforts to combat climate change. And in closing, I would like to extend my thanks to the researchers and IGES and the foundation, Yamato Nichiro Foundation, and the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation. I would like to extend my thanks who have enabled this meeting to take place. Thank you very much.